Something of a running theme in A Song of Ice and Fire is that certain organizations have fallen from the glory that they once held. The Night's Watch is one such example that we see through the eyes of Jon Snow. The rule of Westeros in general is another one, given that it is entirely mismanaged throughout A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. And another big one, through the perspective of several viewpoint characters, is the Kingsguard. This is meant to be a holy order of knights intended to be the best in the realm, fully dedicating their lives and talent to protecting their king and carrying out his will. However, in the present, it is filled by individuals such as Boris Blount, Mirren Trant, these individuals who are very much not good at their jobs, and also a literal zombie giant. So overall, there's a lot of room to improve in the future of A Song of Ice and Fire, and improve it likely will. As at the beginning of the Winds of Winter, we will likely have a new king coming into power in King's Landing, that being Aegon VI Targaryen. Aegon taking the throne seems like sort of a foregone conclusion in The Winds of Winter. The last thing we see of the series as a whole is Varys killing Kevan and Pycelle in order to prepare the ground for this new Targaryen monarch. Lannister power in general is in near complete disarray, and Aegon has had a pretty easy time of it, landing in the Stormlands and already claiming several castles to his cause. It seems as though Storm's End, the high seat of that entire region, will be the next to fall very early on in The Winds of Winter, and from there, Aegon would likely catapult himself into the capital, taking the Iron Throne for himself. And this would make a lot more sense than what we see in the show, with Cersei staying in power, despite how absolutely unpopular she should be at that point. The recruitment process for King Aegon VI's Kingsguard has already begun, and one member of this Order of Seven has already been found, that being Sir Rolly Duckfield. Rolly is a commoner from the Reach who is knighted by Jon Connington and ends up training King Aegon Targaryen at arms throughout his journeys in Essos, with the pair eventually arriving on Westeros together. It obviously serves as a bit of an inversion on the typical dunk and egg story. It's obviously duck and egg instead of dunk and egg, given that this is an Aegon in both cases, and a commoner who's able to teach him skill at arms. But Duck is a fair bit darker than Dunk. There are elements of his past that are a bit more checkered, most notably him beating the son of a lord that he served with a hammer until he was just unable to really do anything, which is justified given the story that we are told, but overall is something that I don't think Duncan the Tall would do, though he does beat Aerion, but that does seem to be a bit more justified than what Duck did. Despite that, I really like Duck as a character, and I think he's going to be an interesting addition to Aegon's Kingsguard, as he is a bit divorced from what Jon Connington wants on Aegon's Kingsguard. There's a passage from one of Connington's chapters that gives a lot of insight into what Aegon's camp is really looking for when filling these last 6 slots of the Kingsguard, beyond even pure martial strength. To quote from the Griffin Reborn, "A solid man, and true," Connington thought as he watched Duck dismount, "but not worthy of the Kingsguard." He tried his best to dissuade the prince from giving Duckfield that cloak, pointing out that the honor might be best held in reserve for the warriors of greater renown, whose fealty would add luster to their cause, and the younger sons of great lords whose support they would need in the coming struggle. But the boy would not be moved. "Duck would die for me if need be," he had said, "and that's all I require in my Kingsguard. The Kingslayer was a warrior of great renown, and the son of a great lord as well. At least I convinced him to leave the other 6 slots open, else Duck might have 6 ducklings trailing after him, each more blindingly adequate than the last." Which, I just love that last sentence, that Connington's such a diva. So, we're looking for sons of great houses, warriors of some renown, and if the king is going to be listened to, just straight up good fighters. I think I've assembled a list of candidates who could fill those roles pretty adequately. The first of which I do see brought up quite a bit in terms of discussions of Aegon VI's Kingsguard, that being the one and only Gerald Dane, the Darkstar. It's unclear where exactly Darkstar's story is going in the Winds of Winter. We know that Ariel Hotah is going off after him after he's going off to High Heritage, fleeing from justice after supposedly killing Aerys Oakheart, despite the fact that that was Ariel Hotah. But I think that Darkstar is known as a very skilled warrior. He's called the most dangerous man in Dorne, and I think he does have something that could very much add a lot to Aegon's claim, that being his name. Obviously, the last Targaryen king who was in power had one of the most famed knights in Westerosi history sworn to his cause, Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Arthur is known as one of the most talented knights to ever live, and having his nephew, question mark, we really don't know the Dayne family tree. It's said that Martin's saving it for the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, but regardless, having another Dayne on the Kingsguard, potentially even with Dawn, if Darkstar is able to steal it, as sort of a sword of the evening, could very much fit into this order, and could also go well with Aegon not being legitimate and having this not legitimate sword of the morning alongside him. Another element that I think will be emphasized here is continuity. Look at the last transition between regimes, at least between two entirely different regimes, Aerys II and Robert Baratheon. We see two Kingsguard knights stay on, despite the fact that these two sides just fought a war against each other, those being Barristan Selmy and Jaime Lannister. I'll address Barristan Selmy later. I don't think he's joining Aegon's Kingsguard, but I do think a member of the current Tommen Kingsguard will stay on and maintain this sort of Kingsguard lineage, as is displayed in this excellent graph made by one of my patrons. I believe that individual is going to be Sir Loras Tyrell. Many people have theorized that Loras is not injured, he is on Dragonstone and fine, and I think that is probably the case. And additionally, if that is the case, he could be a very valuable sword to add to Aegon's lineup. He's known to be very skilled already, and the main thing that is reinforced through Jaime's perspective is that Loras is a young Jaime Lannister, and I think that him joining Aegon's cause and continuing on the Kingsguard, going from one side to the other, is another way where he can mirror the Kingslayer. And additionally, I think the Tyrells, if Mace is not killed in battle, and I do think Mace is maybe more likely to be captured than killed, are poised to switch sides again to Aegon, as they've switched sides from Renly to Joffrey before. While we're on the topic of Reach Lords, I have an idea I haven't seen discussed anywhere else, but I do think it's pretty likely if one assumption I am making is correct. That being the second-born son of Mathis Rowan. Mathis Rowan is a High Lord from the Reach. He's fairly important there, and he is currently the individual holding Storm's End. Mace Tyrell has been besieging it since A Feast for Crows, as he loves to do, but he ends up getting called back to the capital by the end of A Dance with Dragons because his daughter is on trial against the faith. Mathis Rowan is the lord left in charge of the siege, and at present we know that Connington and Aegon are marching on Storm's End. I think they'll likely take Storm's End, and I think a part of it will be turning Rowan to their side one way or another, be it either capturing his token force or just treating with him and convincing him to do so. It's worth noting that they probably will have a chance to treat with him outside of battle, rather than just kind of having to fight him, which will likely be the case with many other lords, especially from the Reach and the Stormlands, and he is fairly important, as he can effectively give them Storm's End, given that he is the one currently penning it in. I think that there are ways that they can get into the castle by guile, as Connington hints, such as the way Davos and Melisandre get in when birthing the Shadow Baby in A Clash of Kings. Additionally, the assumption that I am working with here is that Mathis Rowan has two sons. We know he has at least 3 children, and we know that at least one of those children is a daughter, given the fact that I think that Pip is sent to the Watch for supposedly seducing this daughter. But yeah, I think that if Rowan has a second son, which I think is pretty likely, that son will join Aegon's Order of Knights as a political move to effectively claim Storm's End. I do want to ask, who do you think will be on Aegon's Kingsguard, or who do you want to be on Aegon's Kingsguard? Let me know in the comments below. While you're down there, leave a like, subscribe, and let's get back to my thoughts. When discussing the current political machinations of Westeros, it's important to talk about the Sparrow movement, as it's been a massive thorn in the side of the current regime. I believe the Sparrows are going to take a lot better to Aegon than to Cersei and Tommen, given the fact that there are all of these rumors and all of these terrible things that Cersei's done, and Aegon is supposedly coming back from across the Narrow Sea as this perfect prince. I think the Sparrow movement is going to fully embrace its new Targaryen overlord, given the fact that Targaryens did ally with the faith later on in their lives, especially with people like Baelor the Blessed. And I do think that there is going to be some representative of the faith on Aegon VI's Kingsguard. That could be a member of the Warrior's Sons. I've seen Lancel Lannister floated. I don't think it'll be Lancel Lannister because A, the Lannisters are kind of damaged goods right now, and B, Lancel is just so damaged as to probably die instantly in the next combat in which he's involved, and C, that combat will probably be Cersei's trial by combat in some means or another, and I think he'll probably end up dying there. One individual from the faith I could see defending Aegon, however, is Sir Bonifer Hasty, Bonifer the Good, the leader of the Holy Hundred. I cannot claim full credit for this theory. I'll link to a Reddit post in the description where I at least saw it as originating from, but he is a very fascinating candidate, as he is, first and foremost, known as good. He is a holy man, he is morally upstanding, and I think he would add a lot of legitimacy, at least among the eyes of the common folk, to Aegon's cause, which I think is very, very important, beyond even convincing the lords. Additionally, he has some Targaryen sympathies. We hear from a number of sources that Sir Bonifer Hasty was in love with Rhaella Targaryen, the grandmother of Aegon Targaryen. So in that instance, he might want to remain loyal to this Targaryen regime that he once harbored so much affection for, and as such, he might declare Harrenhal, which he is the current castellan of, for Aegon before eventually joining the Kingsguard. I'm very confident he will declare for Aegon. I'm a little less confident on him actually making his way to King's Landing and joining the Kingsguard, but it could be cool in sort of a Joffrey Doggett situation, mirroring from Jaehaerys. I've listed 5 candidates so far, and I'm fairly confident that those 5 are accurate. Those being Raleigh Duckfield, who is probably going to be the Lord Commander, like Duncan the Tall before him, and is already a member of the Kingsguard. Darkstar, the Dane representation. Loras for continuity and getting the Tyrells on board. The spare son of Mathis Rowan to claim Storm's End. And a representative of the faith, that being potentially Bonifer Hasty. That's 5, and now I'm going to go through a bunch of other candidates who could also join this order. 2 that have the advantage of just kind of being around are Donal Swan and Daemon Sand. Daemon Sand is one of Arianne Martell's retainers who travels with her to meet Aegon. This could be a way to further get the Dornish on side, but he is a bastard and wouldn't have a lot of political importance going into everything, and he really isn't liked by many people in Dorne, as Doran Martell doesn't seem to like him given the fact that he had a prior fling with Arianne. But it could be interesting, and he is a fairly skilled sword, which does seem important to Aegon. And most importantly, he is there. Aegon needs knights in his vicinity. I think that it's going to be something that happens fairly quickly, the creation of this Kingsguard. Additionally, Donal Swan is kind of known as the Constant by Jaime Lannister. He's a knight who's related to a current member of the Kingsguard, Sir Balon Swan, who's probably going to die in Dorne, and he could serve as another idea of continuity, continuing with another Swan on the Kingsguard, as has been the case since Robert initially took the throne. And I do think that that could be an interesting point, as having served so many monarchs, he could just flip on over to Aegon again. But given the fact that he doesn't have a lot of characterization and hasn't been a background player, I don't know how likely that is. Another great candidate would be one of the Redwine twins, whichever one of Horror and Slobber doesn't inherit the lordship when their father dies, as I know being twins, whichever one came out first is going to be the one that gets it. So the other one is very much a second son and has no reason to not join the Kingsguard, and the Redwines have one of the most impressive navies in the Seven Kingdoms. I think that getting them on side could be good for Aegon, though I am partial to the idea that he will gain a navy from Moraine Waters and won't really need the Redwines, especially given their fleet is probably about to be smashed by Euron. I also want to devote a sidebar to someone who I do not think is going to be on Aegon's Kingsguard, that being Sir Barristan Selmy. I think there are a billion reasons that Barristan is not going to be on Aegon's Kingsguard, despite it being suggested very, very often. First and foremost, Barristan is on the other side of the world. I don't think he'd be able to get back to Westeros until like the very end of the Winds of Winter, by which point I would imagine all of Aegon's Kingsguard slots have already filled out. And I don't think he's going to strip the White Cloak from one of them just to give it to Barristan Selmy. It does very much seem like the plan was initially for Barristan to join Aegon's Kingsguard, as Varys is the one who suggested scapegoating him for Robert's death and sent him east to meet Daenerys. And additionally, there was that old plan for Aegon and Daenerys to join their causes, and having Barristan very much adds honor to whoever he supports. But additionally, I think people saying that Barristan is going to join Aegon does kind of ignore Barristan's characterization, as he does kind of love Daenerys. He's like a grandfather to her, and there are a lot of little instances of him just seeming to have affection for her. I really can't see him ever betraying his queen, and additionally, I think he's going to die in the Battle of Fire, so I think there are approximately 20 million reasons as to why the poor old knight is not going to end up joining this new Targaryen king. I want to end by discussing that any or all of these picks I've laid out could be completely wrong. Aegon's main characterization in the story so far is effectively as an impulsive teenage boy. It's pretty remarkable, as all of our teenage viewpoint characters have been so remarkably traumatized that they are not at all normal teenagers who have developed, like teenagers. And I think that Aegon is pretty unique in that regard, and I think that his impulsiveness is going to continue to be a factor throughout the Winds of Winter. I think it'll result in probably a marriage with Arianne, and I could see it resulting in some very unexpected picks for his Kingsguard. So overall, it'll be very interesting to see the trajectory this ancient order takes in the future. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it really helps grow the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think of this roster I've dreamt up, and I would love to hear your own opinions for Knights I've forgotten about, also in the comments down below. I'll have many more videos for you on A Song of Ice and Fire, Dunk and Egg, House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, and I look forward to sharing all of them with you. Goodbye, everyone. I'll see you soon.